The ovum travels through the fallopian tube toward the uterus. At the same time, the lining of the uterus becomes engorged with blood and nutritive fluids in preparation for the development of a fertilized egg into a baby. If the female cell is not fertilized, it dissolves or disintegrates in the tube.
Since the lining is no longer needed, it too dissolves away. And it flows out of the body through an opening in the hymen, which is a membrane over the opening of the vagina. And so we say that we are menstruating.
And this is called menstruation.
Just the natural, normal process leading up to being a mother.
Peggy, of course I can't go swimming. You know I've got the curse.
My name's Diana. From the beginning, menstruation's given me nothing but trouble. 5 days a month. It takes over my life and I see red. Cramps, migraines and depression. Sounds more like symptoms of a disease than of a natural process. If I am healthy, what makes menstruation so painful? My visit to the gynecologist didn't provide any answers. The medieval torture chair, the cold metal instruments poking around inside, always yielded the same diagnosis. Everything's fine. Take a pill. But I didn't want to take pills anymore, and so I stopped. And now my period and its army of symptoms wages war, and the battlefield is my body. Being a woman felt like punishment for a crime I didn't commit. For generations, the women in my family suffered from PMS and painful periods, which, like a family heirloom, was passed on to me. Growing up, I learned the topic was off limits. I got the message loud and clear. When you are menstruating, no man should know. Ever. At any given time, 25% of the female population is menstruating. Invisible, discreet. Why is this normal biological function taboo? There must be some deeper meaning. To find out if attitudes towards menstruation had changed since the fall of the Iron Curtain, I went back to my elementary school.
No, moje obrázok je o tom, že vlastne bojuje aj dobro so zlom, že dobro s tým, že budem môcť mať deti a rodinu, ostatné veci a to zlo, že budem nervózna a bude ma to boleť a plakať budem celé dni, noci možno. Neviem, aj dobro, aj zlo, že také vyrovnané to je také na rovnakej úrovni ako keby.
A dievčatá, vymenili by ste sa za chalanov, keď ste mohli? Áno.
Lebo oni nemôžu dostať menštruáciu, ale nemajú výhodu, že nemôžu nosiť také vysoké topánky ako my. Potom oni keď idú na záchod, tak to majú oveľa ľahšie.
Čiže sa postavia a môžu cikať hoci kde.
Ale my keď si čupneme, tak to je všetko vidno.
In my native Slovakia, there was a custom at winter's end, whereby menstruating girls were pulled across fields to fertilize the soil for spring. Unfortunately, most menstruation myths aren't so quaint. They draw attention away from the fact that 80% of women suffer either physically or psychologically during menstruation. 150 different symptoms are attributed to PMS. In other words, at this very moment, millions of women on Earth are unhappy, and yet the silence is deafening. So I took it upon myself to find some answers. Having grown up in Eastern Europe, I look to the West as the land of opportunity and the seat of knowledge. Once there, I headed to its most prestigious centers of learning.
Menstruation, yes, but sort of all of reproductive biology is very intimately connected to our emotional life and our emotional experience, even via pathways that are operating within our bodies. Certainly there are other pathways that operate outside of our bodies in terms of social practices and cultural practices having to do with reproductive biology that then affect how we feel and think and behave. Other people are experts in that domain. I'm, alas, not. But the area that I do know something about, which is what's going on inside the body, to me is just as compelling in the connections that it speaks to between reproductive events and the inner life of human beings.
It's very interesting. I wondered at first if the academic approach wasn't over my head.
I think the culture of concealment that surrounds menstruation does influence the way that we feel about our bodies, because in a certain way we get a message very early on that we are not supposed to talk about periods. And historically there's been, until very recently, no movies that mention menstruation, no books that mention menstruation. No one talks about it in public. So young girls get a message that this doesn't happen. So it's very disorienting, I think, for a young girl to feel like something like this is happening to her and happening to her body, but no one talks about it. And so I think it does begin to influence the way you feel. You try to make sense of that. Why does no one talk about menstruation? It's something shameful.
I was the last girl in my class to get my period. It came without warning. Standing at the blackboard, something wet oozed between my thighs. I felt naked in front of everyone. It was like a nightmare, except that I was wide awake. For centuries, religion dictated what women could and couldn't do during their unclean days. But as religion's influence diminished, new ways were found to exclude women and keep them in their place.
I think medicine is the institution who gives body or physis to the social order. And you can see how medicine in the 19th century first talks about the uterus and then talks about the ovaries and menstruation as a sign that women cannot go to the university because their monthly blood obscures their capacity to think and so on.
Throughout American history, you can document certain cases where social scientists are enlisted to prove that women are less efficient in the workplace when they're having their period. Those studies tend to crop up at certain points in history when there's a lot of anxiety about women's increasing role in public life. For example, when women were first pushing to have access to higher education, to go to college in this country, there was a rash of studies showing that their periods made them unfit scholars and were indications that they would not be able to handle the rigors of intellectual life because of their periods. And then a little bit later, when the U.S. went to war during World War II and the government really wanted women to be in the workforce, there began to be studies showing that women were very capable workers regardless of whether they were having their periods. Then after the war, when the government wanted women to go back into the home and raise their children and give those jobs in the factories back to men, there's a whole new slew of studies showing that menstruation renders you unfit for efficient work and that a woman's place is in the home raising children. When you look at it that way, there are definitely political reasons for periods to be analyzed and questioned and put in front of the public in this way.
One of my favorite early studies was done by Alice Dan, and what she did was she measured mood every single day in men and women. And what she showed was that over a month or over 2 months, that men's moods were just as variable as women's moods. But women could at least predict when their moods were going to be less than optimal.